What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars completely loses it on live television? In just 33 seconds, Richard Gere went from composed guest to absolutely furious, storming off the View's stage in what might be the most explosive exit in daytime TV history. If you want daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals and the most shocking celebrity confrontations caught on camera, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. You won't believe what goes down behind the scenes. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be a friendly conversation about Richard Gere's latest humanitarian work and his upcoming projects. Instead, it turned into an absolute disaster that has everyone talking this morning. The tension in that studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as a simple discussion quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable moments in talk show history. This wasn't just a disagreement between a host and a guest. This was a full-blown explosion of anger, accusations, and deeply personal attacks that left everyone in that studio completely speechless. What you're about to hear is exactly how a celebrity interview can go from perfectly normal to absolutely catastrophic in a matter of minutes. Richard Gere walked onto The View's set looking relaxed and ready to chat. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie, looking every bit the Hollywood veteran who'd done 1,000 of these interviews before. He waved to the audience with that famous smile of his, and they erupted in applause. The ladies at the table were all smiles too, greeting him warmly as he took his seat. The lighting was bright, the energy was high, and absolutely nobody in that room could have predicted what was about to happen. Whoopi Goldberg started things off nice and easy. She asked about his new film, some indie drama he'd been working on, and Gere seemed genuinely happy to discuss it. He talked about the director, some up-and-coming filmmaker he really believed in. He explained the story, something about a father reconnecting with his adult children after years of estrangement. He talked about why he connected with the character, how it reminded him of his own relationship with his kids. Everything seemed perfectly normal and pleasant. The audience was engaged, laughing at his jokes about being on set in the freezing cold. The hosts were nodding along, asking follow-up questions about his co-stars and the filming locations. Sarah Haynes jumped in next, asking about his upcoming charity gala for homeless youth. Gere lit up talking about it. You could tell this was something he genuinely cared about. He spent a couple minutes explaining the organization, what they do, how many kids they've helped get off the streets and into stable housing. The audience clapped. Everything was going great. This was exactly the kind of feel-good content The View loves. A beloved actor talking about his meaningful projects and giving back to the community. Perfect. Then Joy Behar jumped in with what she probably thought was a harmless question. She brought up Gere's history of political activism, specifically his long-standing advocacy for Tibet and human rights in China. She smiled as she asked about his recent comments regarding Hollywood's relationship with the Chinese film market and how studios have been bending over backwards to please Chinese censors and investors. It seemed like a reasonable topic at first, a little more serious than the previous questions, sure, but not necessarily controversial. Just moving the conversation into slightly deeper territory. Gere's face changed immediately. You could see it happen in real time. His smile disappeared like someone had flipped a switch, and he leaned forward slightly in his chair. The relaxed, friendly demeanor he'd had just seconds ago was completely gone. He said he'd been very clear about his position for decades and wasn't going to apologize for standing up for human rights. His voice had an edge to it that wasn't there before. It wasn't aggressive yet, but it was firm, defensive. You could tell this was a sensitive subject for him. Joy nodded, still smiling, seemingly not picking up on the shift in Gere's mood. She pressed him, saying that some people think his activism has hurt his career significantly and cost him major movie roles over the years. She mentioned that several big-budget films reportedly passed on casting him because studios didn't want to upset Chinese investors and lose access to that massive market. She asked, in that way she has of making it sound conversational, if he had any regrets about taking such a strong stance, if there were moments where he wondered whether it was worth it. The atmosphere in the studio shifted dramatically. You could feel it ripple through the room. The other hosts glanced at each other nervously. Sonny Hostin's eyes went wide. Alyssa Farah Griffin sat up straighter in her seat. The audience got quiet. That kind of uncomfortable silence, where everyone knows something is about to happen, but they don't know what. Gere sat back in his chair and just stared at Joy for a long moment. The silence stretched out, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. Then he spoke, and his words made everyone gasp. He told her, very slowly and deliberately, that if she was suggesting he should have stayed silent about genocide and oppression just to make more money and star in superhero movies, then she fundamentally misunderstood what being a human being means. He said the words calmly, but there was steel underneath them. He wasn't yelling, but somehow that made it even more intense. The audience actually gasped audibly. A few people said, "Oh," under their breath. This was not the direction anyone expected this interview to go. Joy's face went red instantly. You could see her jaw clench. She shot back that she wasn't saying that at all, and that he was twisting her words into something they weren't. Her voice got louder, more defensive. She said she was just asking a fair question about the consequences of his choices, about the reality of working in an industry that increasingly depends on international markets. She added that plenty of actors manage to have successful careers without alienating entire markets and making themselves virtually unhireable for certain kinds of films. She wasn't attacking him, she insisted. She was just trying to have an honest conversation about how Hollywood works in the modern era. Gere laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was bitter and angry, the kind of laugh that says, "I can't believe what I'm hearing." It was harsh and cutting. He said that maybe those actors she was talking about should look in the mirror and ask themselves what they're willing to compromise for fame and fortune. He said that silence in the face of oppression makes you complicit, and that he couldn't live with himself if he'd kept quiet just to get cast in another blockbuster about robots or comic book characters. He said some things are more important than having your face on lunchboxes and action figures. The other hosts tried desperately to jump in and calm things down. You could see the panic in their eyes. This was spiraling fast. Sonny Hostin attempted to steer the conversation in a different direction, bringing up Gere's charity work with homeless youth again, trying to get back to safer ground. But Joy wasn't done. Not even close. She interrupted Sonny mid-sentence and said that Gere was being self-righteous and acting like he was better than everyone else in Hollywood. She told him that not everyone has the luxury of turning down multi-million-dollar roles to make political statements. Some people have families to support, mortgages to pay, careers to maintain. It's easy to take the moral high ground, she said, when you're already set for life. That's when things really exploded. Gere's voice got louder for the first time. He told Joy that she was completely missing the point and that this wasn't about money or career advancement at all. He said people were being tortured in prison camps, killed for their beliefs, having their entire culture systematically erased, and all she could talk about was movie deals and box office numbers and career considerations. He said it was disgusting. He actually used that word, disgusting. The audience went completely silent. You could hear people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was genuinely hostile. Joy stood her ground. She wasn't backing down an inch. She raised her voice right back at him and said he was being condescending and putting words in her mouth that she never said. She insisted she was simply trying to have a real conversation about the difficult choices people face in the entertainment industry, choices he apparently felt he was above making. She said that it's easy to take the moral high ground when you're already rich and famous and established, when you've already made your fortune and don't need the work anymore. But not everyone has that privilege, she repeated. Not everyone can afford to turn down work on principle. Gere actually stood up from his chair at this point. Not quickly, not violently, but deliberately. He rose to his feet and stood there, looking down at Joy. He wasn't yelling yet, but his whole body was tense. You could see his hands were clenched. His jaw was tight. He told Joy, speaking very carefully and precisely, that privilege is exactly the reason why people like them have a responsibility to speak out. He said that if someone with his platform, someone with his visibility and influence, won't say anything about injustice, then who will? The people being oppressed don't have a voice on American television. They don't get invited onto talk shows. So, if he stays silent, who speaks for them? He asked her directly if she thought staying silent about human rights violations was somehow the more ethical choice. Is that what she was saying? Because that's sure as hell what it sounded like to him. Joy threw her hands up in exasperation and said that's not what she was saying at all, not even close. She told him he was being deliberately obtuse and twisting every single word she said into something it wasn't. She accused him of grandstanding and performing for the audience instead of having an honest conversation with her. She said he was more interested in looking like a hero than actually engaging with the complex realities of working in modern Hollywood. It was a cheap shot, she said. To act like anyone who doesn't sacrifice their entire career for activism is somehow morally bankrupt. Whoopi tried to intervene again, more forcefully this time. She said they should take a commercial break, cool down, maybe come back to this topic later with clearer heads. She was trying to de-escalate, trying to give everyone a moment to breathe. But both Gere and Joy ignored her completely. They were locked in now, and nothing was going to stop this train wreck. It was like everyone else in the studio had disappeared. It was just the two of them, facing off across the table. Gere pointed his finger at Joy, actually pointed at her, which you almost never see in these situations. He said that if she thought asking him if he regretted standing up for human rights was an honest question, then maybe she should think long and hard about what her values actually are. He said it was exactly that kind of thinking, that acceptance of moral compromise for personal gain, that allows terrible things to happen in the world. When good people decide that speaking up is too inconvenient, too costly, too risky for their careers, that's when evil wins. That's when oppression continues unchecked. And he wasn't going to be part of that, not for any amount of money. Joy's face was completely red now. She was visibly angry in a way you rarely see on television. She told Gere that he had some nerve coming on their show and lecturing her about values. Some damn nerve, she said, actually swearing on air. She said she'd been speaking out about injustice and fighting for causes her entire career, long before it was fashionable, long before celebrities made it part of their brand. She accused him of being on a high horse and treating everyone around him like they were morally inferior just because they didn't make the exact same choices he did. She said his attitude was insufferable and self-righteous and frankly insulting. The audience was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Some people had their mouths hanging open in shock. A few audience members were looking at each other with wide eyes, like they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every excruciating second of this absolute disaster. The producers in the control room were probably losing their minds, but what could they do? Cut away and pretend it wasn't happening? That would just make it more obvious that things had gone completely off the rails. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Sarah Haynes had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. Alyssa Farah Griffin was frozen in her seat, not moving, barely breathing. This was way beyond anything any of them had signed up for. Gere took a step back from the table. He shook his head slowly, deliberately, like he was trying to process what he was hearing. He looked at Joy, then at the other hosts, then back at Joy. He said, very quietly but very clearly, that he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He couldn't believe that she'd invited him on the show just to attack him for having principles, for standing up for something bigger than himself. He said if that's what The View had become, a place where standing up for human rights gets you ridiculed and questioned and made to feel like you're the problem, then he wanted no part of it, none whatsoever. Joy shouted, actually shouted, that nobody was attacking him, nobody. She said he was being dramatic and turning this into something it wasn't. She said all she did was ask legitimate questions about his career choices and the consequences he's faced, and he turned it into some moral crusade where he's the hero and everyone else is the villain. She told him to get over himself, to come down from his high horse and have a real conversation instead of this performance he was putting on. That was the final straw. That was the moment where Gere decided he was done. You could see it in his eyes. He reached down and ripped off his microphone, yanked it right off his collar. The sound of it hitting the table echoed through the studio, a sharp crack that made several people in the audience jump. He didn't throw it, but he didn't set it down gently either. He looked directly at Joy, held her gaze, and said one more thing. He told her that some things are more important than TV ratings and audience approval and getting along with everyone. Some things are more important than being liked, or being invited back, or having a pleasant conversation. If she couldn't understand that, if she genuinely couldn't grasp why he'd sacrifice movie roles to speak out against oppression, then he felt sorry for her. He truly did. He said he'd rather have integrity and a clear conscience than compromise his values for anyone, including her, including this show, including everyone watching. Joy started to respond, her mouth opening to fire back another retort, but Gere was already walking away. He didn't wait to hear what she had to say. He didn't stick around for a rebuttal. He just turned and walked straight toward the edge of the stage. He didn't look back at the hosts. He didn't wave to the audience. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He just walked, steady and determined, off that stage while the cameras followed his every move. His footsteps echoed in the silent studio. Every eye was on him. Whoopi called after him, her voice cutting through the silence. "Richard, please, come back. Let's talk about this." But he didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He kept walking like he hadn't heard her at all. Or maybe like he'd heard her and just didn't care anymore. Within seconds, he disappeared backstage, and you could hear a door slam, even with the studio audience sitting right there in complete shocked silence. The sound reverberated through the studio. Boom. Final. Definitive. That was it. Interview over. The hosts sat there at the table looking at each other, and nobody knew what to say. What could they say? Joy had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, still looking angry, her face still flushed. But there was something else there, too. Maybe surprise that he'd actually left. Maybe a hint of regret. Hard to tell. The other women seemed completely stunned by what just happened. Sunny had her hand on her forehead. Sarah was staring at the spot where Gere had been sitting, like she couldn't process that he was gone. Whoopi eventually managed to say, in a voice that sounded tired and frustrated, that they'd go to commercial. The cameras finally cut away, and everyone in that studio let out a collective breath they'd been holding. But the damage was done. It was irreversible. In less than 10 minutes, what was supposed to be a light-hearted celebrity interview, the kind of thing The View does every single day, turned into one of the most intense confrontations in talk show history. Richard Gere walked onto that stage as a welcomed guest, a beloved actor there to promote his projects and chat about his life. He walked off as a man who'd had absolutely enough, who'd been pushed to his breaking point. He didn't hold back. He didn't try to smooth things over for the sake of appearances, and he definitely didn't care about being invited back on the show ever again. That bridge wasn't just burned, it was incinerated. The whole thing was absolutely brutal to watch. These are two people who've been in the public eye for decades, both known for speaking their minds and not backing down from their beliefs. Gere has been an activist since the early days of his career, never shying away from controversial causes. Joy has been a talk show host and comedian who built her reputation on being direct and unfiltered. When you put two people like that in a room together and touch on topics they're passionate about, topics that go to the core of who they are, this is what happens. No filter, no politeness, no smoothing over the rough edges, just raw confrontation and deeply hurt feelings on both sides. Neither one of them was playing a role or putting on a show. That was real anger, real frustration, real conviction coming from both of them. Joy clearly felt like she was asking reasonable questions about Gere's career choices and the consequences he's faced for his activism over the years. From her perspective, she was trying to have a real, honest conversation about the difficult decisions people in Hollywood have to make every single day. Should you speak out knowing it might cost you work? Is it worth sacrificing your career for political statements? These are legitimate questions that lots of people in the industry face. She probably thought she was doing her job, being a journalist, asking the tough questions that viewers want answers to. But Gere heard something completely different. He heard someone questioning whether standing up for human rights was worth it, and that hit a nerve in a major way. That touched something deep and personal for him. You have to understand that Gere has been advocating for Tibet and speaking out about China's human rights record since the 1992. He's been banned from entering China. He's been turned down for major film roles specifically because studios didn't want to anger Chinese authorities and lose access to that market. This isn't some casual political opinion for him. It's been a defining part of his life and career for over 30 years. So when Joy brought it up and questioned the cost, he took it personally. But Joy wasn't backing down either. She's been on The View for years and has never been afraid of tough conversations or confrontational guests. She genuinely seemed to believe she was asking fair questions about the entertainment industry and the choices actors face. When Gere accused her of valuing money over human rights, she got defensive and fired right back at him. Neither one of them was willing to give an inch. The other hosts tried their best to play peacekeeper, but there was no stopping this collision. Once Gere and Joy locked horns, it was going to end badly one way or another, and it did. With Gere storming off the set, ripping his mic off, and making it crystal clear that he was done with the entire conversation. What made it even more intense was how personal it got. This wasn't just a disagreement about politics or Hollywood business practices. Both of them made it about character and values. Gere essentially called Joy morally compromised for even asking the questions she did. Joy accused Gere of being self-righteous and condescending. Those are the kinds of accusations that cut deep and don't get forgotten. The audience didn't know how to react. Some people gasped when the arguing got heated. Others sat there in uncomfortable silence, watching two famous people tear into each other on live television. A few people could be heard murmuring to each other, probably trying to process what they were witnessing. This wasn't the fun, light-hearted drama The View is known for. This was genuinely hostile, and through it all, the cameras kept rolling. Every angry word, every pointed finger, every moment of tension was captured and broadcast. The producers probably realized pretty quickly that this wasn't going to end well. But what could they do? Cut away and pretend it wasn't happening? That would have made it even more obvious that things had gone completely off the rails. When Gere finally walked off, you could see the shock on everyone's faces. Guests don't usually storm off The View. They might disagree with the hosts. They might get a little testy, but they don't rip their microphones off and storm away. That's a level of confrontation that's rare even for this show, which has seen its share of heated moments over the years. Joy sat there looking angry and frustrated. She clearly felt like Gere had overreacted and made her into some kind of villain when all she did was ask questions. But Gere obviously felt like those questions themselves were the problem, that they revealed a mindset he finds deeply troubling. Two completely different perspectives on the same conversation, and neither one of them was willing to see the other's point of view. The fact that this all happened so fast made it even more shocking. From the moment Joy asked about his activism to the moment Gere walked off the stage, maybe 10 minutes passed. That's all it took for a celebrity interview to completely fall apart. 10 minutes of escalating tension, raised voices, and hurt feelings, ending with one of Hollywood's biggest stars saying he'd had enough and leaving. This is the kind of moment that defines talk show history. People will be talking about this confrontation for years. It'll be in compilation videos and best-of lists. It'll be referenced whenever someone brings up memorable View moments. Richard Gere's dramatic exit from The View, with Joy Behar sitting there fuming and the other hosts looking stunned, is now part of television lore. And the craziest part? Nobody saw it coming. When Gere walked out there at the beginning of the segment, everything seemed fine. He was smiling, the hosts were welcoming, and the audience was excited to see him. Within minutes, all of that goodwill evaporated and turned into one of the most uncomfortable confrontations daytime TV has ever seen. The tension was real. The anger was real. The hurt feelings were real. This wasn't scripted drama or manufactured conflict for ratings. This was two strong-willed people with deeply held beliefs clashing in real time, and neither one of them willing to back down or smooth things over for the sake of the show. That authenticity, as uncomfortable as it was to watch, is what made it so compelling. When Richard Gere disappeared backstage and that door slammed shut, it wasn't just the end of an interview. It was the end of any pretense that this conversation could be salvaged. He made his statement by walking away, and it was louder than anything he could have said if he'd stayed in his seat.